All right. Yeah. I want to introduce to also the topic, a review on the feasibility of having whether synthetic or natural graphite battery anodes manufacturing capacity here in the US land. Um, to begin with, I mean, why at all graphite? Um, graphite is actually ubiquitous, omnipresent in all different types of battery formulations, especially on the anode side. So in a battery, you do have anode and cathode. So all the cathode chemistries, I mean, this is what the LIB um, different variants are named after. You probably have it NCA and NMC, LFP these days that's taking off. I mean, these are all cathode chemistry references, but on the anode side, the silent player here is actually the graphite. And graphite has been, from day one of the inception of lithium-ion battery technology and until today, it's the primary material of choice for making anode. And it's been steadily used, and it performs well, and also it's relatively inexpensive compared to all other cathode minerals that are being used these days. But why we have to talk about graphite is that there is a potential shortage that actually looming, especially now with the EV adoption rates are going through the roof. So based on the available capacity of whether that's natural or synthetic graphite, those are not going to be enough to meet our projected EV transition efforts. And it's worth noting that as of 2022, US, here in the US, we haven't produced one single metric ton of natural graphite. There are few prospects, new mines are being explored, but they are not production ready yet. And on top of that, almost close to two-thirds of the natural graphite output is from China alone. Let's zoom into this topic of China's dominance on the graphite and battery supply chain. If we start to zoom in, this is what I was trying to explain to you about the natural graphite, the starting raw material to make the natural graphite anode. So there are other steps being involved. I will walk you through in a quick second. But this step itself is actually heavily dominated by China, mainly because of that's where you do find graphite on the ground, in the ground. But it's very similar situation also with the synthetic graphite, where you artificially synthesize graphite from carbonaceous raw materials. And not only the starting raw material, but the post-processing of the starting raw material to make the anode grade materials that ultimately will end up into the battery cells is also, this processing step is also heavily concentrated on the Chinese side. And that's actually no wonder. The reason last year, US DOE have designated graphite as one of the critical mineral that's of importance, heavy importance for the US economy and also national security. And you can see here, this chart from US DOE, graphite is actually on the right of this chart, where it says on a supply risk pretty high, and also high importance for the energy transition. And graphite is located here amongst other materials that are also important for our national security and also this energy transition effort. But then probably have heard different anode materials like the silicon and so on. Then the obvious question would be that, oh, okay, why don't we talk about the other materials? I mean, why specifically graphite? As I said, I mean, throughout the 2+ decades of the lithium-ion battery, 2-3 decades now of lithium-ion battery, graphite been the primary material of choice, and there is actually a reason, mainly because of its pricing. I mean, it's relatively affordable, especially for so that we can make batteries that are economically viable. And on top of that, on the volume scale that's needed. So the anode material, as I said, um, weight percentage wise, it's one of the highest actual weight percentage content in a battery itself. So you need that. What does that mean? So you need a whole lot of material. We are talking about million metric tons. I mean, multiple million metric tons every year usage of this mineral alone. So you need consistent, high quality material at a relatively affordable price range. And all the other materials, I mean, the new prospects, I mean, especially silicon is a really promising one, but there are tons of issues that needs to be solved, both on the technology level and also economical level, until it can compete directly with graphite. But it's a serious contender. And that's the reason why I want to focus primarily on the materials that are on the high TRL level and also currently economically viable, that would help to compete with the other countries and also ensure that we can put up capacities relatively shortly to meet the shortage that are actually looming not too far, especially beyond 2025. So let's take a quick peek into two different manufacturing process, how you derive synthetic graphite that fit for battery anode material. So it starts with a petroleum coke. I mean, it's a carbon precursor that typically derived from distilling heavy oil. And this material further needs to get calcined and also graphitized, and so that it attains the properties of a graphite and getting converted into a material that's looks like basically graphite. And that further may need to go into post-processing so that it can be used as an anode material into the battery cell. So there are different variants of this technology, but these are the three major process blocks that you would see in any kind of synthetic graphite battery anode material production. And the natural graphite side, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated. I mean, there are more steps involved, mainly because you first need to mine the ore from the earth, and you need to enrich the ore. That's what's collectively called beneficiation. There are multiple steps involved. I won't go through that in detail. But then, as the name suggests, I mean, it's a natural flake graphite. It's in platelet forms. So these platelets itself is not a suitable form in terms of shape to make an anode. So you need to shape it, spherinize it, or make spheres out of it. And that's a heavy, that's a step very particular for the natural material. And then you need to thermally purify because you are getting a very low quality carbon content material. So you need to improve the purity, whether that by chemical means or thermal means. And then you need to coat this material using carbon coatings, pitch coatings, and until and after that, they become ready to be used as a natural graphite, a battery anode material. But now let's put now from the US point of view, right? I mean, so we don't, as I shown you, we don't have any actual capacity available to make a natural graphite mine, operable mine here in the US land. But we do have some synthetic graphite capacity. So if we were to start from scratch, I mean, if you're talking about a greenfield, I mean, so we find a source, I mean, we have to put up a plant to make battery anode material made in the US, how would the timeline would look like? First, let's take a look at the natural graphite. I mean, as I don't know how to explain in detail. I mean, exploration first we need to figure out, I mean, where exactly the graphite mine is. I mean, and then we need to get, obviously, someone need to do the environmental effect study. I mean, a whole lot of study, and then figure out whether it's even a viable mine from a economical point of view. I mean, if that all that passes, I mean, all these tick marks, then need to go through the permitting phase. Then you have to do an extensive environmental study to prove the effects of operating a mine in that natural habitat. And then that typically takes anywhere up to 1 to 2 years. And then construction of the graphite mine and its processing facilities. As I've shown in the previous slide, there are different steps that needs to be put in place to first to do the beneficiation, coating, I mean, all these other purification, all the necessary steps. And it would take anywhere 3 to 10 years, basically from an operational graphite mine until it reaches its full production capacity. But when we compare it to a synthetic graphite route, planning and permitting, I mean, it's a industrial process. You do get starting raw material, so you basically can cut down all these steps that's prior that you would need to do before even you acquire the land to put up a greenfield or develop a greenfield site. Obviously, there is permitting needs to be happening, and planning and permitting, typically 1 year or even less in most of the cases. And if you already know how to make graphite, putting up a plant based on the lead time and so on, the engineering typically takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years for such an industrial facility. And in a short span of time, I mean, compared to the natural graphite, for instance, here, less than 5 years, it will reach full production capacity and even can contribute to pay back, I mean, and start to pay back the investment. But so then that's from the timeline point of view. But there is another aspect of the price point, right? I mean, whether it's beneficial from a price point of view to go with one or the other, whether there is a preferred choice. To answer that question, let's take a look at the dynamics, or price dynamics that's happening in the world. I mean, we don't have that currently in the US. As I said, I mean, we don't have production here. So we have to sense this from what's happening in China, because that's where the market and also the output currently is. So in 2021, during the COVID lockdown, China had several issues with the power grid and also environmental pollution regulations. And graphite mines, natural graphite mines, are heavily concentrated on the northern side of China, where they had issues with the power supply. So all of a sudden, there was a mismatch between their even domestic consumption of graphite for making batteries and also the output that they can get. So, but on the southern side, that's where all the natural graphite or the heavy industries are located, and they do already have available established capacity of synthetic graphite. So during a short period of time, I mean, within just 1 year, 2022, it went China's available capacity of synthetic graphite that's jumped from 1 million metric ton to now almost close to 2.3 million metric ton. Just a huge shift, and that's changed the overall dynamics of pricing between synthetic and natural graphite that we have seen over the course of last 2 or 3 decades. It was a basic 180-degree shift. So far, it has been, and that it's been natural graphite, a relatively cheaper material to buy from China, but now the starting raw materials are more or less very equivalent. There are still some minor differences, but if we are, I mean, we cannot take this price differential one-to-one right over to the US side, because I mean, environmental regulations are going to be different, the raw material pricing, all the other minute details that we need to take into consideration. Yeah, it will be a little bit different, but what I want to highlight here, the sensitivity and also the dynamics and the power of just one country to shift the overall price dynamics of this product altogether. And that's actually, again, one of the reasons why we need to start to think more seriously about having production capacities on the US land and in general on the Western Hemisphere, diversifying. And last but not least, I mean, especially the price, I mean, overall, these lower prices comes at a cost to the environment, more probably not to the buyer, but us as a collective citizens of this globe, I mean, we are ultimately paying for the cheaper price from China, one way or the other. But then the other aspect is the environmental friendliness, right? I mean, if we wanted to put up a new capacity here, is there a better choice based on the carbon footprint? At the end, I mean, these are manufacturing processes. I mean, heavy energy usage in both cases, and also the raw material and also the process steps are contributing to the carbon emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. So is there a choice in that regard? That's where we hit another issue. To begin with, as I said, I mean, we don't have one operational mine here on the US land, so we cannot derive a good quality data. We can only get estimates. But even then, what we realize is that there is a huge lack of data, good quality data, mainly because primary data that's actually not available. What does that mean by primary data? Primary data means data coming from an industrial site where they do have access to actual energy consumption and also material usage and all the effects of operating and deriving, let's say, a kilogram of the finished product of graphite. And we just don't have that. So what happens is that people do theoretical calculations and people assume processes that's nowhere near or closely matching the actual reality. And at the end, I mean, we get all different types of data that are not of good quality to make any kind of good judgment. And adding to that problem is the lack of standards. It's only really recently means just 2 months ago, there was a first draft of product category rule just for the graphites being published. So what does that mean? There is actually all the LCAs, I can say with high confidence that all the LCA studies as of today that's available in the public domain, none have followed the PCR rule, mainly because it wasn't available there. So people were making their own standards. I mean, they were referring to standards on the ISO standards for a different industry that's not relevant. But long story short, lack of rules and standards that further complicated this issue, the LCA. And obviously, when you don't have good quality and it's not based on any kind of standards, that's obviously becomes impossible to compare one to the other. And that's the situation where we are in. And people tend to focus on certain specific parts of that process and hiding the overall process implications and so on. So the message that being put out by the LCA studies, partial LCA studies, or even totally wrong LCA studies are basically nothing of good quality for making any kind of educated judgment on selecting the material of choice for US production. And how we can overcome that. Obviously, we have to start with the standards, and that's exactly happened real recently. Now it's up to all different stakeholders in this landscape to jointly develop good quality data based on these standards, and that needs to happen. So, in summary, I mean, I have explained you all the different challenges that are associated with the graphite supply chain. I mean, it's so complex. I mean, multifaceted, whether that's be from the security point of view, climate, all the economic factors. It's just multitude of issues. But let's try to make it simple. I mean, if and try to address this via a decision tree, for instance. So if you wanted to make a battery anode material a US domestic source within the 10 years, what are our choices? Obviously, we need to establish a new capacity. Basically, we don't have any. And the question is that, okay, how much time we have got? I mean, whether we need this capacity to become viable within less than 8 years or so. I mean, yeah. So if that's an yes, then SGBM, or the synthetic graphite battery anode material, route probably the best way. I mean, and mainly because, as I explained in the timeline comparison, it's possible to even start to get paid back within less than 5 years. And if we do care about, I believe absolutely we do on this side of the pond, we do care about the greenhouse gas emissions, then we need to find a location where we have access to green energy, and then maybe try to repurpose a greenfield. Mainly because, I mean, this constraint here, if we want to be not midterm, but on the short term. But if here, for instance, we don't care about the GHG, then we can establish the brownfield or repurpose the brownfield anywhere without having access to green energy. And if we do have a little bit more time, I mean, 5 to 8 years, then we can even think about starting from a greenfield to make the synthetic graphite. But here, if we say that, no, I mean, we still have got 8 to 10 years rather than less than 8 years, then maybe we can go down the route of a natural graphite. And again, more or less the same considerations here with respect to GHG. So that obviously corresponds to the access to green energy sources. Whereas altogether, if we say that, no, we don't really need a US domestic source, what does that entails to? I mean, that does mean that, I mean, obviously we don't make anything domestic. So we have to rely on the existing supply chain, and the very early sites I have shown that that's heavily, almost close to 90% of the capacity is just focused, concentrated in one country, and that's highly risky. But then there is a little bit more convoluted, but still, I mean, if we don't want to establish anything on the US side, I mean, that's not the end of the route. I mean, there are other ways. I mean, we can try to develop new partnerships with our trade partners and also our strategic partners. And again, we have to follow this selection criteria based on how quickly we want to achieve capacity. Or so but I mean, I just want to highlight this aspect of repurposing greenfield. I mean, if we are if we want to have something on the US land within the short span of period, it's beneficial to repurpose our existing synthetic graphite capacities where we already do have the capacity, but we do use that capacity to make graphite shapes and all the other different products that are going into different markets. Mainly because there are several positives to that approach. One, obviously, expedited readiness, because it's over there. I mean, it's available, so it's a quicker turnaround. And obviously cost efficiency, because upfront cost of the capex that's needed to if you are starting from a green field, it's obviously going to be substantially higher compared to repurposing a green field. The third, no-brainer, already workforce available that are familiar with this manufacturing process and the material. And it's sustainable. Obviously, we are going to utilize the available capacity and resources, and rather than putting up a new facility that will have more footprint on the environment, irrespective of whether that's a natural or synthetic graphite. And more importantly, we can meet the market demand that's going to shoot through the roof, from 2025 on, and we will be ready. And obviously, on the Western Hemisphere, we do care about the law, and we do care about the environment, and that means, regulations. We need to adhere to the regulations, and repurposing brownfield reduces the red tapes associated with the permit. So, in summary, what our path forward? So, from a technological viability and sustainability point of view, obviously, compared to all the different anode materials out there, synthetic and natural graphite are of high TRL, technology readiness level. So they are matured processes that we can take up further. And there are certain advantages with the synthetic graphite if we compare the synthetic graphite to natural graphite. But obviously, from a long-term sustainability, to ensure that we do have steady, differentiated streams of material available, we need to also gradually integrate natural graphite because, it's not only because of that, it also takes some time. So we need to facilitate that as well. From security and environmental point of view, we obviously need to strengthen our domestic production capacity. We need to reduce a heavy reliance on the import, primarily from just one country. We need to think about, besides of onshoring certain capacities, we need to also think about developing other collaborative efforts and also new joint development efforts together with the countries that we do have economical and also strategic ties with. And from a sustainability point of view, obviously, whatever the size and also the material that we are choosing, whether that's synthetic or natural graphite, especially for synthetic graphite, it does make absolute sense to tie it to green energy, because it's a heavy electrical energy consuming process that's involved graphitization. And if we can use primarily green energy, this will help to reduce the carbon footprint of the graphite, and we will get a better chance for fighting compared to the material that's made in China, primarily based on the coal-derived energy. And when we are talking about mining, we're responsible. And also we don't want to repeat the same mistakes or issues that we do see in the Eastern Hemisphere. We don't want that. So we need to be responsible with respect to mining practices, and from the LCA point of view, so that it's clear for all the stakeholders, what the carbon footprint. We need to have better good practices overall. With that, yeah, I would like to summarize here, and thanks. Really do appreciate your time. Yeah, I will take any questions.